I didn't say a word when my daughter-in-law told me I was an embarrassment. I just set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter, the same counter I'd installed myself 31 years ago, and looked out the window at the backyard I'd mowed every summer since before her husband was born. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, waiting for me to fight back. I didn't give her that. My name is not important. What matters is what I built and what almost got taken from me. I spent 40 years working for the County Roads Department outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Not glamorous work. I drove equipment, poured asphalt, patched potholes in July heat that would make a grown man cry. I came home dirty every night, and I didn't complain about it, because the work paid real money, and the pension was solid and I had a plan. My late wife Joanne always said I was the only man she knew who could see 20 years ahead while living completely in the present. I think she meant it as a compliment most of the time. We bought our house in 1987 for $82,000, a 3-bedroom ranch on Clover Ridge Road with a half-acre lot and a detached garage that I converted into a proper workshop. Joanne planted roses along the fence. I built the back deck with my own hands over 2 summers. We raised our son there. We buried the dog there. We sat on that deck on summer evenings and watched the fireflies come up from the creek bed behind the property line, and neither of us ever felt like we needed anything more than what we had. Joanne passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to gone. I won't say much more about that because some things don't need to be narrated. She was the best person I've ever known, and I still set 2 coffee mugs out some mornings before I remember. My son, I'll call him my son because that's all he is to me in this story, married his wife about 3 years before his mother died. She was polished in a way that made me uncomfortable from the start, the kind of woman who says absolutely instead of yes, and laughs a half second after everyone else laughs, like she's checking to make sure it's safe first. I never said anything to Joanne about it. She liked her well enough. I kept my mouth shut. After Joanne died, the house felt like a museum. My son called every Sunday and asked if I was okay, and I said yes, and he said good, and we talked about football or the weather, and then we hung up. That went on for about a year. Then one Sunday he called and said his wife thought it might be a good idea if they moved in me. Help around the house. Company. He said it like it was his idea, but I could hear her coaching in the background. Not literally, but in the way the sentences were shaped. Too careful, too rehearsed. I said yes because I was 63 and alone, and I thought having family nearby might be good for all of us. That was my first mistake, not the last. They moved in March of 2021. My son kept his job remotely. He does something with software that I've never fully understood. And his wife had quit her job in Nashville to focus on some projects, which as far as I could tell meant she rearranged furniture and attended a lot of video calls that required her to shut doors firmly when I walked past. The first 6 months were fine, mostly. There were small things. She moved Joanne's china from the cabinet in the dining room to a box in the garage without asking me. She told me the workshop smelled like oil and chemicals, and that it was honestly probably not safe for her to be around given her sensitivities. She started referring to the master bedroom as our room in casual conversation, which would have made sense except that I still slept in it. I let things slide. That was my nature. I'd spent 4 decades learning when to speak and when to wait. Joanne used to say I had more patience than sense sometimes. She wasn't wrong. The real shift came in the spring of 2022. My daughter-in-law's parents had been living in an assisted living facility outside of Chattanooga, and apparently the facility had some kind of inspection issue. I heard different versions of the story at different times, and they needed to relocate. She brought it up at dinner one night, very casually, the way someone brings up a topic they've been preparing to bring up for weeks. She said it made more sense for her parents to move in here than to find another facility. The house had space. She said it would be temporary. I asked what temporary meant. She said probably a year, maybe a little longer. I said I'd have to think about it. She said she didn't think there was much to think about, given the circumstances. I looked at my son. He looked at his plate. That was the moment I understood the whole geometry of the situation. My son was not a villain. He was just someone who had slowly, quietly handed over every decision in his life to a woman who was very good at making decisions feel inevitable. I recognized it because I'd watched it happen over years the way you watch a slow leak. You notice it, but you keep thinking it'll stop on its own. I told her I needed a few days. She gave me a tight smile and said, of course. 2 days later, she came to me with what she called a practical solution. She said her parents needed more space and accessibility than the guest room could offer. She said the master bedroom would really be the best fit for them because of the ensuite bathroom. She said she thought it might be a good time for me to consider the senior living community on the east side of town. Maplewood. She'd already looked it up. She said it had great reviews. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something colder. The kind of clarity that only comes when someone finally shows you exactly what they think you are. She thought I was a problem to be managed. A piece of furniture that was in the wrong room. I told her I'd think about it. She apparently took that as a yes. Within the week, she had scheduled a tour of Maplewood for me. She drove me there herself, very cheerfully, pointing out the amenities like she was doing me a favor. The place was fine, clean, well-stuffed, a nice common room with a big television. I smiled and nodded and asked polite questions, and the whole time I was thinking about something my father told me when I was a teenager. He said the most powerful move you can ever make in any negotiation is to let the other person think they've already won. I never corrected her assumption that I was going to move. I went home and I called my attorney, a woman named Sandra who has handled my affairs for 15 years and who I trust completely. I told her what was happening. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I value about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me one question. Is your name the only name on the deed? I said yes. She said, then you have a lot more options than you think. Sandra walked me through everything over the next few weeks. I didn't share any of this with my son or his wife. I went about my days normally. I let my daughter-in-law schedule the movers. I let her talk to me about what to pack and what to donate. I said a lot and drank my coffee, and sometimes sat on the back deck in the evenings and thought about Joanne and what she would have said about all of this. I think she would have been angry in that quiet, precise way she had. I think she would have told me to be careful, and then told me to be exactly as ruthless as the situation required. I let them move me into Maplewood on a Friday in June. My daughter-in-law hugged me at the door of my unit and said she was so glad I was comfortable and that she would call to check in. My son carried a box of books and couldn't look me in the eye. I told him it was okay. He said he was sorry. I said I knew. What none of them knew was that the day before I moved to Maplewood, I had signed a contract with a real estate investor named Gene Barker, who had been interested in Clover Ridge Road for over a year. Gene was buying 3 properties in the area to convert into long-term rentals. Sandra had facilitated the introduction. We agreed on a price that was considerably above market value. The half-acre lot and the workshop were worth more than the house elf to someone like Gene, and we set a closing date for 90 days out. Under Tennessee law, once the sale closed, anyone living in the property who was not a named party on the lease, and there was no lease, because I had never asked anyone to sign one, would be subject to the new owner's terms. Gene planned to rent the property out, but had no interest in inheriting tenants he hadn't vetted. Sandra drafted the notices. I reviewed them. They were precise and entirely legal and gave 30 days to vacate following the close of sale. I want to be clear about something. I didn't do this out of pure revenge. I did it because the house was my asset, built on 40 years of work, and Joanne's careful saving and decisions we made together long before anyone else was part of our lives. I had every legal and moral right to sell it. What I chose to do with the timing, that part, I'll admit, had some poetry to it. My daughter-in-law had been planning a dinner party. I heard about it through my son, who called me one Sunday, still doing the Sunday calls, still talking about the weather, and mentioned almost in passing that she was having some of her friends over. A sort of informal gathering to show off the house. She'd done some redecorating, new paint in the living room, some kind of shiplap accent wall in the dining room, over wallpaper that Joanne had chosen and hung herself in 1994. But I let that thought pass. The dinner party was a Saturday evening in September. The closing had happened that Thursday. Gene was accommodating about the timing. He didn't need to be. The notices could have been mailed. But when I explained the situation to him over coffee one morning, he smiled and said he'd be happy to deliver them in person if I wanted to be there. He was a straightforward man in his late 40s, Heavyset, friendly, the kind of person who explains things simply and means what he says. He had no particular interest in drama. He just thought it was a funny situation and said as much. Sandra advised me to be present as a witness and to say as little as possible. I took her advice. We arrived at 6:15. Through the front window I could see candles lit on the dining room table and hear the sound of people talking. My daughter-in-law answered the door in a blouse I hadn't seen before, her hair done, a glass of white wine in her hand. When she saw me, the social smile she'd been wearing flickered, just for a half second, and then came back, but different, tighter. "Dad," she said. "My son uses that word. She never had before." "I hope I'm not interrupting," I said. Gene stepped forward and introduced himself, and explained that he was the new owner of the property, and that he wanted to hand-deliver the change of ownership notification, along with the notice to vacate as required by Tennessee law, and that he hoped they had a pleasant evening, and that 30 days was of course a minimum, and he was willing to discuss a reasonable timeline if needed. He was polite, he was professional. He handed her the envelope. She didn't take it at first. She looked at me. I looked back. She took the envelope. My son appeared from somewhere behind her, holding a beer, wearing a shirt I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. He looked at Jean. He looked at me. He looked at the envelope in his wife's hand. I watched him understand everything in about 4 seconds. "Dad," he said, and this time the word sounded different than it did in her mouth. I said, "You should probably read what's in that envelope." The guests in the dining room had gone quiet. There were 4 of them at the table, people I didn't recognize, all turned toward the front door, with the particular attention of people who know they are witnessing something, but don't yet know what. My daughter-in-law opened the envelope. She read it. She read it again. Then she said, in a very controlled voice, that she didn't understand, that this couldn't be legal, that I couldn't just sell the house without telling them. I said, gently but clearly, that it was my house, that I had never signed anything giving them any rights to it, that my attorney had reviewed every step of this process, and that the 30 days was generous. She said her parents were living there. I said I was aware of that. She said this was cruel. I thought about the morning she drove me to Maplewood, pointing out the common room television. I thought about the box in the garage where Joanne's china was sitting in newspaper. I thought about my son looking at his plate. I said I hoped they would find something comfortable. Gene gave them his card and said his property manager would be in touch about the move-out inspection, and we left. My son called me that night. I answered because I always answer when he calls. He was upset. Not angry exactly. He didn't raise his voice, but shaken in a way I hadn't heard since his mother died. He said he didn't know what to say. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once, and I believed him more with each repetition. I told him that I loved him. I told him that wasn't the issue. I told him that a man who lets someone be pushed out of his own home, because it's easier than having an argument, is going to spend the rest of his life having that same argument in different forms. I don't know if he heard it. Maybe not then. These things take time to land. He asked where they were going to go. I told him that was something he and his wife needed to figure out together, and that I hoped they would figure it out honestly this time. His wife's parents found a new assisted living placement within 2 weeks. The county social services office was actually very helpful once they understood the situation. There are programs for exactly this kind of emergency placement, and the new facility was, by all accounts, quite good. My son and his wife moved into a rental in the suburbs east of Knoxville, a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex with a gym and a rooftop deck. She posted pictures of it online, I was told, as if it had been her choice all along. I stayed at Maplewood through the winter. It was quieter than I'd expected to enjoy. I ate breakfast in the common room and read the paper, and talked to a retired schoolteacher named Francis, who had opinions about everything, and made me laugh more than I had in years. I took long walks. I slept well for the first time in a long time. In the spring since I bought a smaller house on the other side of town. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a good-sized yard with nothing planted in it yet. The kitchen needed updating. The garage was just a single car but had a solid concrete floor. And I thought with some shelving and a workbench it would make a decent shop. I didn't need a 3-bedroom ranch anymore. I needed something that was mine, built around the life I actually had now, rather than the one that was over. I planted things along the fence in May. Not roses. I didn't want to try to replicate something I couldn't replicate. I planted lavender and black-eyed Susans and a climbing hydrangea that the nursery woman said would take a few years to establish but would be worth the wait. I'm 67 years old. I have time. My son and I still talk on Sundays. The conversations are longer now. Less weather, more honesty. He told me a few months ago that his marriage was going through some things. I didn't ask for details. I told him I was there if he needed me, and I meant it because whatever mistakes he made, he is still my son and I am still his father, and that doesn't change based on what happened. He came over for Thanksgiving, just him. He helped me hang shelves in the garage, and we ate turkey sandwiches standing at the kitchen counter and watched a game in the afternoon, and it was the most normal few hours we'd had together in years. Some people, when I tell them what I did, say it was harsh, that I should have talked it through first. That family is family. I don't disagree that family is family. But I'll tell you what I told my attorney the first day I sat down in her office. A man who owns a house and lets someone talk him into leaving it, without a word, is not keeping the peace. He's just disappearing slowly, a piece at a time, until there's nothing left to disappear. I worked 40 years for that house. Joanne and I built a life in it. No one gets to decide it's inconvenient and hand it back to me in the form of a Maplewood brochure and a hug at the door. They thought I had nothing left to fight with. They forgot that the house was mine. They forgot, or maybe they never knew, that sometimes the quietest man in the room has already won.